포즈가 조금씩 아주 조금씩 미세하게 변해서 어떤 지점에서는 완전히 다른 지점으로 이동해 있다는 걸 느낄 때 되게 신기한 것 같아요. 네. 선생님, 세상의 모든 것은 한 자리에 있다고 늘 말씀하셨지요. 언젠가 그 말을 이해하고 싶었습니다. 미혹된 자는 굽은 등을 갖게 마련이니까요. 심장이 있던 자리에 한 마리 새를 키우게 되었습니다. 잠결에 날아와 둥지를 틀더니 나가지 않아서 쫓아내려 애를 쓰다 그만 포기하고 말았습니다. 이름을 붙여주고 나니 이제는 이국의 유일한 식구가 되었습니다. 너무 아름다운 것은 때로 삶이 아닌 죽음에 육박한다는 것을 한 번도 상상한 적 없는 채 살 수 있었다면 저는 달라질 수 있었을까요? 봄은 그토록 서늘하기에 유리처럼 빛날 수 있다고. 제가 시를 쓸 때 항상 뭔가를 감춘다고 생각을 하거든요. 그렇기 때문에 알레고리로 시를 쓰는 경우도 많고 좀 현실에 있지 않은 정황이나 인물들을 끌어와서 쓰기도 하고 이 세계에 존재하지 않는 공간에서 시가 진행되기도 하고요. 그럼에도 불구하고 되게 솔직하다고 느끼신다면 그거는 아마 굉장히 시가 육박해 들어오는 지점이 있다는 칭찬이 아닐까 그렇게 느껴지고, 저는 그 세계에 벌어진 부분이 있다고 생각을 해요. 그런데 그 부분을 제가 계속 응시하고 고개를 돌리지 않으려고 애를 쓰기 때문에 그 지점에서 불편함이라는 게 발생하는 게 아닐까 하고 생각합니다. 네. 제 꿈이라고 하면 조금 거창하지만 저는 계속 시를 쓰는 게 꿈입니다. 계속해서 자기 갱신을 하면서 써나가는 것. 네.
Welcome to the Globalists. Welcome to the Globalists. Welcome to the Globalists. We're in a new set, a brand new set.
I am a globalist.
And I'm the globalist.
And I'm the globalist who wants to bring junk right into your kitchen.
In our headlines on this Tuesday, June 10th, here in South Korea. President Lee Jae-myung speaks on the phone with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping earlier today and agreed to advance bilateral ties for mutual benefit. The Korea Development Institute says the local economy remains weak amid the prolonged doldrums in the construction sector and slowing exports in light of U.S. tariffs. U.S. President Donald Trump mobilizes some 700 U.S. Marines and thousands more National Guard troops to L.A. to tackle protests against immigration raids. We start at the top office, where President Lee Jae-myung held phone talks with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping earlier on this Tuesday and extended a cordial invitation to this year's APEC summit, scheduled to take place here in South Korea this coming autumn. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
During his first half-hour phone call with Chinese President Xi Jinping, President Lee Jae-myung invited him to South Korea for the upcoming APEC summit in the southeastern city of Gyeongju this November. If he does attend, it'll be Xi's first visit to the country in 11 years. Tuesday's conversation was friendly and amicable, says Lee's spokesperson, where Xi congratulated Lee on winning the election, and the two leaders shared similarities in their political career. Their focus was on building a new bilateral relationship, bolstering cooperation in areas that could practically help the lives of the people in both countries.
President Lee expressed hope that South Korea and China will actively promote exchanges and cooperation in various fields, including the economy, security, culture, and people-to-people exchanges based on the spirit of mutual benefit and equality.
Also addressed was North Korea, where Lee asked Xi to play a constructive role for the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. And Xi responded by saying Beijing will make efforts, saying peace and stability fit into their mutual interests. It's been a week since Lee took office, during which he exchanged greetings and held get-to-know sessions with the leaders of some major countries, first with his U.S. counterpart, Donald Trump, followed by Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Then came talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
President Lee, during his presidential campaign, said that ROK-US alliance is the most top priority, and then he also put lots of emphasis on the relationship with Japan. Of course, he mentioned that with South Korea and Japan, the trilateral cooperation is important. So he simply implement what he has pledged.
The series of talks comes as the newly inaugurated Korean leader prepares for his debut on the multilateral summit stage next week in Canada, where the G7 leaders are set to meet, where sideline summits are possible with Trump and Ishiba.
All 7 countries share the same value as this liberal democratic country, and they also have the same goal to balancing against China. To participate this G7 meeting, even though we are not the member of G7, but as the observers, it can deliver the very significant message to China.
The upcoming diplomatic stage is also widely seen as a litmus test of how the new Korean president will navigate diplomacy, both with the U.S. and China in mind, as he puts forth pragmatic diplomacy. This as Korea also makes its comeback on the diplomatic stage official after a 6-month hiatus following the impeachment of the former leader. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
3 high-profile special prosecution bills were passed during a cabinet meeting presided over by President Lee Jae-myung earlier on this Tuesday morning. The probes will focus on the martial law declaration by former President Yoon Suk-yeol, allegations against former First Lady Kim Gun-hee, and the death of a Marine during flood relief operations back in the year 2023. These bills had been previously vetoed by the Yoon administration, but are now set to take effect. The South Korean economy remains sluggish amid the prolonged doldrums in the construction sector and slowing exports in light of U.S. tariffs. Now, this is according to the latest assessment by a state-run think tank. Our Moon Ji-young has more.
A state-run think tank has diagnosed that the South Korean economy remains subdued overall, noting escalating external uncertainties driven by U.S. tariff hikes. According to the June Economic Trends report released on Tuesday, the Korea Development Institute states that the country's economy is weighed down by continued weakness in the construction sector and a slowdown in exports. The agency stated that construction investment continued its decline, constraining recovery in domestic demand. Overall production growth is also slowing, with the construction sector notably contributing to this deceleration, posing a significant drag on the economy. Exports also showed weakening momentum, especially in sectors heavily exposed to U.S. tariff. This included a continued decline in exports to the U.S., with automobile shipments notably falling by 32% year-on-year. In contrast, manufacturing production maintained solid growth led by semiconductors, with persistent demand supporting robust growth in production, exports, and related equipment investment in this sector. Meanwhile, household and business sentiment showed modest improvement amid easing political uncertainties and progress in trade talks between Washington and Beijing. The Consumer Sentiment Index recovered to the baseline level in May, signaling an easing in the contraction seen since last year.
It seems the situation itself has improved compared to the first quarter. Since interest rate policy is now moving towards an easing stance, I think it might gradually contribute to an improvement in domestic demand.
However, the KDI warned that trade-related uncertainty remains high due to further increases in steel and aluminum tariff and concerns over a potential resurgence of U.S. China trade tensions. 문지영, Arirang News.
On a positive note, South Korea's current account remained in the black in April, but the surplus stood substantially lower on month amid the U.S.'s tariff campaign. Our Shin Se-byuk has the latest numbers.
South Korea posted a current account surplus of $5.7 billion in April. That marks 24 consecutive months in the black since May 2023. According to data released by the Bank of Korea on Tuesday, the surplus shrank sharply from the previous month, $9.1 billion. But it was still a notable jump from the $1.5 billion surplus recorded a year earlier. The decline was mainly driven by a sharp reversal in the dividend income balance, which swung from a $2.6 billion surplus in March to a $650 million deficit due to concentrated payouts to foreign investors. April's goods account, the largest component of the current account, posted a surplus of around $9 billion, backed by solid export performance. Exports rose nearly 2% on year to $58.6 billion, led by semiconductors and wireless devices. IT exports jumped almost 11%, while auto exports fell by just over 4%. Imports, meanwhile, fell 5.1% to nearly $50 billion, largely due to lower global energy prices, including coal and crude oil. The services account remained in deficit, posting a $2.8 billion shortfall in April, a wider gap than the previous month, as Korean firms spent more on tech licensing, consulting, and platform services. In the first 4 months of the year, the cumulative current account surplus reached nearly $25 billion, up almost $7 billion from the same period last year. But one expert pointed out that these figures reflect a period before new U.S. tariffs took effect and warned the surplus could narrow further in the month ahead.
Lower energy prices may ease imports, but Trump's tariffs could hit exports harder, narrowing the surplus compared to last year.
He also noted that with the global economy slowing, a sharp rise in stock prices is unlikely, and the gains in the primary income account are also likely to remain limited, further narrowing the overall surplus. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
In other news, passenger train service between Moscow and Pyongyang that were halted back in the year 2020 amid the pandemic will resume next Tuesday. According to Russian railways, the service will be available twice a month, with the train from Pyongyang departing on the 3rd and 17th of every month, and that from Moscow departing on the 12th and the 26th of each month. The one-way trip takes 8 days and is reportedly the longest direct train journey in the world, spanning over 10,000 kilometers. Over in London, American and Chinese delegates are resuming a second session of trade talks on this Tuesday, following their first session on Monday to address differences over the deal reached in Geneva. Our Park Chun-an covers these talks as well as their prospects by pundits here.
The United States and China on Monday discussed export controls, specifically the easing of U.S. technological export restrictions in exchange for greater access to China's rare earth metals. This was on the agenda for the first day of the second round of talks in London. According to a Financial Times report, U.S. President Trump said he could ease cheap exports to China if Beijing agrees to accelerate the export of rare earth metals and magnets to the United States. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer led the U.S. delegation. The Chinese side was headed by Vice Premier Hao Lifeng. While U.S. chip exports and China's control of rare earths could serve as leverage in negotiations, experts say the talks are unlikely to significantly improve market access for either side.
I don't think these trade talks are likely to bring fundamental changes in the U.S.-China relationship at this point, and so the negotiations won't end here. Korea should keep a close eye on the situation and prepare appropriate responses.
On the surface, there may be some concessions between the U.S. and China. However, China can restrict rare earth exports at any time, and the U.S. is only partially easing controls on legacy semiconductors. Therefore, I believe this military-like battle for technological hegemony over high-tech industries between the two nations is likely to continue.
Earlier in May, the two countries agreed to significantly reduce tariffs on each other's goods for 90 days. However, following the Geneva Agreement, the United States claimed that China had violated the terms by maintaining export controls on rare earth metals, despite pledging to lift non-tariff barriers. China denied the accusation and instead accused the U.S. of taking discriminatory actions, such as canceling visas for Chinese students. Meanwhile, the two countries are set to hold further talks at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
In Los Angeles, protests against immigration raids persist, with the Trump administration now mobilizing some 700 U.S. Marines and thousands of additional National Guard troops to the area. Our Choi Soo-young has the latest.
Los Angeles faces the fourth day of protests against the Trump administration's immigration raids. At least 56 people have been arrested during the protests, according to NBC News. Protesters shut down major highways, throwing concrete and Molotov cocktails. Cars were burned to ashes, and police responded with tear gas and flashbangs, filling the streets with smoke. The Los Angeles Police Department declared the entire downtown area a no-protest zone on Sunday local time, concerned about the growing violence of the protesters. On Monday, the Pentagon deployed about 700 Marines to LA to support the National Guard. Around 2,000 National Guard troops had already been sent by U.S. President Donald Trump to control the situation without the governor of California's request.
Thank goodness we sent out some wonderful National Guard. They've really helped in a lot of problems they were having out there. They were afraid to do anything, and we sent out the troops, and they've done a fantastic job.
In response, California's Governor Gavin Newsom said he will file a lawsuit against Trump over the activation of the state's National Guard. President Trump called Governor Newsom incompetent and supported arresting him after Tom Herman, the official in charge of border issues, warned that Newsom and LA Mayor Karen Bass could face arrest for interfering with immigration enforcement.
Look at the job he's doing in California. He's destroying one of our great states. And if I didn't get involved, if we didn't bring the Guard in, and we would bring more in if we needed it, because we have to make sure there's going to be law and order.
Meanwhile, the protests that began in LA are now popping up in other major cities, including San Francisco and Chicago. In San Francisco, around 60 people were arrested during Sunday's demonstration. The protests were sparked when immigration and customs enforcement officers and the FBI raided downtown shops in LA last Friday, detaining around 44 people. Choi Soo-young, Arirang News.
Much to the delight of BTS fans worldwide, members RM and V were discharged from the military service earlier this morning. The two members came together to thank fans for their unwavering support. The remaining three members are also set to return, with Jungkook as well as Jimin scheduled for discharge tomorrow, that is Wednesday, and Suga later this month. Jin and J-Hope completed their military service last year and have been pursuing solo music careers as anticipation mounts for the group's full return. A ceremony was held here in Seoul today to commemorate the 38th anniversary of South Korea's June 10 pro-democracy movement. Some 200 people, including government officials and politicians, were present for the solemn affair. In a written message, President Lee Jae-myung asserted that democracy is advanced when the past is remembered to build the future. The event also marked the opening of the National Museum of Korea Democracy, located in what was once the Anti-Communist Investigation Office, a site notorious for state violence during the 1970s and 1980s military dictatorship. Ultimately, the country's pro-democracy campaign led to constitutional amendment, paving the path to direct presidential elections. A fire that broke out at around 10 a.m. on this Tuesday at a building within the compound of the historic Choge Temple here in capital Seoul was extinguished some 90 minutes later. Some 300 monks and officials from the Choge order were at a meeting in the building's conference hall but were all safely evacuated. There have been no reports of casualties nor damage of national treasures. The cause of the fire has yet to be confirmed. Up next, a showcase here in Seoul suggests botanical gardens may be the key to sustainable solutions to some environmental concerns. Our Pyongyang files this report.
Environmental issues are a global challenge. But there's one solution that can boost biodiversity and cool the local environment: botanical gardens and arboretums. An event in Seoul is opening a new chapter in exploring their role in tackling environmental issues. The 11th International Congress on Education in Botanic Gardens.
From June 9th to 13th, the COEX Ground Ballroom has been transformed into a global hub of botanical garden education, where ideas take root and grow into solutions for a greener future.
The Global Forum on Botanical Garden Education comes to East Asia for the first time. This year's theme is Education for Change, Botanic Gardens' role in addressing global challenges. At the core of the conversations is the importance of working together as a community to mitigate environmental challenges. Keynote speaker Choi Jae-chun posed the idea that the COVID-19 pandemic was the result of imbalances in biodiversity.
If this severe imbalance in biodiversity isn't addressed in some way, we'll continue to face situations like this repeatedly. It's simply a matter of probability.
He highlighted the importance of botanical gardens as a means to promote biodiversity and raise interest in environmental conservation. Another keynote speaker, Shahbaz Khan, discussed the vital role of UNESCO in reversing climate change and highlighted botanical gardens as key tools in building sustainability.
The botanical gardens are important for keeping the cities cool, and they can be an answer to increasing temperatures. They can help us reduce the needs for the air conditioning, for example.
He pointed to thermal images of a city which showed how places with gardens had cooler temperatures and underscored the importance of botanical gardens in conserving plant species. Over the course of 5 days, participants are engaging in workshops, panel discussions, and a field trip to the Korean National Arboretum as they work toward a greener, more sustainable planet. Botanical artwork brings a colorful, creative layer to the educational experience, while booths showcase various contributions to environmental preservation. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. Israeli naval forces have intercepted a yacht carrying climate activist Greta Thunberg and 11 others while it was attempting to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza.
The Israeli Navy boarded the British-flagged yacht Nat'l, operated by the pro-Palestinian Freedom Flotilla Coalition, detaining Thunberg and a French lawmaker among those who were on board. On early Monday, the vessel was seized approximately 185 kilometers from Gaza in international waters and escorted into a port in Israel by the evening. Israeli officials confirmed the activists were unharmed and will be deported after undergoing medical checks. They said that the yacht's cargo of symbolic aid such as baby formula, rice, and medical kits will enter Gaza through official Israeli aid channels. While Thunberg denounced the interception as kidnapping, Israel dismissed the mission as a media stunt and called the aid boat a selfie yacht. Governments in Sweden, France, and Spain have lodged consular requests, and France's President Macron has demanded swift repatriation. The boat departed from Italy on June 1st to raise awareness of the conditions in Gaza. Ukraine and Russia began the first stage of a multi-phase prisoner exchange repatriating servicemen under the age of 25 following a humanitarian agreement reached during peace talks. On Monday, the first phase of a prisoner swap agreed on in Istanbul on June 2nd took place, involving young military prisoners and severely wounded individuals. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed the exchange in his evening address, emphasizing a phased approach over several days and thanking all parties involved. Although specific numbers were undisclosed, both nations affirmed an equal exchange of prisoners. Despite conflicting claims over the exchange between the two nations the previous day, the exchange marks hope for broader negotiations, aimed at exchanging at least 1,200 prisoners from each side and repatriating fallen soldiers. Apple unveiled its liquid glass design and advanced AI upgrades in iOS 26, its first major visual overhaul since iOS 7, during its Worldwide Developers Conference on Monday. The liquid glass interface introduces translucent, refractive UI elements across all platforms, including iPhone, iPad, Mac, Apple Watch, and TV. AI enhancements powered by Apple Intelligence include live translation in messages, FaceTime, and the phone app, all of which are processed on device. The public beta of iOS 26, including liquid glass and AI features, launches this summer, with the full release slated for this fall. Labubu dolls, a toothy plush toy from Chinese maker Pop Mart, have seen a surge in popularity and price worldwide. Created by Hong Kong artist Ka-Sing Leung and marketed since 2019, Labubu shot to fame after being spotted with celebrities like Rihanna, Dua Lipa, and Blackpink's Lisa. Collectors, mostly adults, are drawn by the blind box format of the collectibles, which offers randomly packed variants, some rare versions, fueling a global frenzy. Official retail prices range from about $20 to $30, but resale values have exploded from $100 to $7,000 for rare editions. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
In the central parts of the country, it was cloudy and rainy today. The daytime temperature did not rise significantly. The temperature in Seoul rose up to only 26 degrees Celsius, which is about 4 degrees lower than yesterday. However, the East Coast and southern areas continue to be hot during the day. It will be hotter tomorrow across the country. In addition, strong winds will blow around the eastern parts of Gangwon-do province until tomorrow morning. There will be places with gusty winds of more than 15 meters per second. Not only that, Jeju Island will receive frequent rain until Saturday. Tomorrow morning will start cool with Seoul and Daejeon at 16 degrees, Chuncheon at 14 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 29 degrees in Seoul, Daejeon, and Gwangju, 27 degrees in Busan. There is rain forecast starting from the Chungcheong provinces in southern areas on Friday and spreading to the whole country on Saturday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, that ends our newscast for now. Thank you for watching.
제주특별자치도가 6차 4.3 희생자 보상금 신청을 2025년 1월 2일부터 2026년 12월 31일까지 받습니다. 신청 대상은 본인 및 민법상 상속권자가 가능하며 제주도 내 읍면동 주민센터로 방문 접수 혹은 도청 4.3 지원과 보상팀으로 우편 접수하시면 됩니다. 또한 4.3위원회 심의 결정 이후 보상금 결정서를 통지받으신 분들은 청구 서류를 제출하시면 됩니다. 자세한 사항은 제주도청 064-710-8450으로 문의하시거나 4.3 종합정보시스템 홈페이지에서 확인하세요.
플라스틱 사실 편리하잖아요. 저조차도 활동을 하고 있지만 플라스틱을 사용할 정도로 생활에 많이 있다고 생각을 하는데요. 플라스틱을 대체할 수 있는 걸 계속해서 찾고 플라스틱이 아닌 다른 것을 사용하는 게 일상의 습관이 될 수 있도록 하는 것이 조금 중요하다고 생각을 해서 참새클럽 캠페인을 중점으로 활동하고 있습니다. 저희는 HDP랑 PP라는 두 가지 재질의 플라스틱을 모으고 있습니다. 보통 음식료에 사용되기 때문에 배달용기나 이런 곳에서 많이 볼 수 있고, 그리고 두 번째로는 저희가 업사이클 가공을 할 때 가장 유독물질이 덜 나오는 물질이기 때문입니다. 플라스틱을 많이 모으고 많이 제작하는 것이 목적이 아니다 보니까 저희는 시민분들한테 플라스틱 기부받고 리워드를 드리는 게 아니라 모아주신 플라스틱이 이렇게 재활용됐다는 걸 알리기 위해서 하는 프로젝트여가지고 이걸 약간 기부가 아닌 돌려드리는 개념으로 지금 하는 규칙을 사용하고 있는 것 같습니다. 불편한 거예요. 사실 이 플라스틱을 실제로 사용하는 걸 모으고 이걸 세척해서 가져오시고 하는 과정이 이 불편함을 사실 해주고 계신 것만으로도 저희는 되게 감사하죠. 나아가서 플라스틱을 사용하지 않을 수 있는 방법을 내는 것이 저희의 숙제이고요. 그리고 가장 중요한 건 이런 자원순환 활동에 있어서 시민 참여가 어떻게 얼마나 중요한 키워드로 적용이 되는지를 계속 말씀을 드리고 싶어요. 그래서 시민 참여 가이드를 조금 내는 게 저희의 목표이자 바람이라고 말씀드릴 수 있습니다. 나는 플라스틱을 순환시키는 그리너다.
held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the State of Summit. The Jae-myung administration faces a host of tasks on both the domestic and diplomatic fronts as it hits the ground running after winning the snap election just a week ago. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Press Perspective. It's June 10th here in Seoul. I'm Min San-hee. We continue our conversation with members of the foreign media with regard to the leadership transition here in South Korea and its broader implications. For this, I have freelance journalist Yang Chen-hao from Taiwan here in the studio. Chen-hao, as always, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Hello, good to be here.
I also have Chloe Bogno with French broadcaster France 24 here in the studio with us. Chloe, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having me again.
Chen-hao, we will start with you. Let's begin with a few words regarding the phone conversation between President Lee Jae-myung and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping earlier on this Tuesday morning.
Yeah, it just happened like 6 hours ago, 11:30 a.m. So the presidential office in South Korea has revealed that the President Lee Jae-myung has had a phone call with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And President Xi mentioned that he hoped to work with the South Korean new government to develop strategic cooperative partnership between South Korea and China. Then President Lee replied that he hopes that South Korea and China will actively cooperate in various areas such as economy, security, culture, and people-to-people exchanges based on the spirit of mutual benefit and equality. And then President Lee sent an invitation to President Xi to attend the APEC, which is going to be held in Gyeongju later this year, and express his hope for closer exchanges of views to further develop the bilateral relations. And President Lee also requests China to play a very important and constructive role in making peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and achieving denuclearization. And President Xi said that peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula are the common interest of both two countries, and China will take efforts to ensure them. So you can see that President Lee, first he had a phone call with President Trump, and then is Prime Minister Ishiba from Japan, and then President Xi today.
Right. Chen-hao, there's also been quite a bit of speculation about the new administration's potential diplomatic blueprint. What have you been hearing with regard to regional security?
So for foreign media, one of the most important issues of the presidential elections this time is about the candidates' attitude toward the diplomacy and national security, definitely this time. And Taiwan has become a very hot topic this time. I've covered the presidential election here for 4 times already, from 2012 till now. And this is the very first time for me to see that Taiwan and the cross-strait relations between such an important issue and being mentioned so many times by each candidate. And when asked by the Time magazine if South Korea would come to aid Taiwan, come to Taiwan's aid in case of the attack from China, Lee Jae-myung responded that he would answer only when aliens are about to invade the earth. And 1 week before the election, I've also asked Lee Jae-myung's advisor charging diplomacy and security, Wi Song-lak. Now he has become the president's director of national security of the presidential office. I directly asked him, what is President Lee Jae-myung, what is candidate Lee's position if the United States deploys United States forces Korea to assist Taiwan and even request Seoul for providing support? And he said that it is still too early to formulate a concrete or a clear plan for this kind of hypothetical scenario. However, if a conflict were to occur, were to happen between Taiwan and China, it will definitely have very negative effects on regional geopolitics. And South Korea will strive to prevent such things from happening. But when asked by other Chinese journalists, Mr. Wee spent more time, 5 times longer than me, emphasizing that South Korea do want to improve its relationship with China and strengthen various forms of cooperation. And regarding relations with China, now the current new government is currently very cautious and with a vague or obscure space referring to China. You can see that they are unwilling to criticize China as directly as President Yoon Suk-yeol did. And instead, they emphasize building multilateral relationship based on the Korea and the United States alliances and promoting diplomacy with China and Russia simultaneously. This is indeed very idealistic, but is this really feasible in reality? We'll need to see. Given President Trump's unpredictability, I think we cannot rule out any possibilities, but Seoul will need to convince Washington first.
Right. And just to be clear, Chen Hao, your questions to Wee Sung-lak, they were made before he was elected president.
Yeah, 1 week before the election.
Right, I see. Chloe, with regard to national affairs, what decisions by the Lee Jae-myung administration as of now have caught the attention of the foreign media, do you think?
I would say the first thing that's been really interesting for foreign media is the economy. So, I mean, Lee Jae-myung has said it when he was a candidate, also when he started being the president in the inauguration day. His priority is on recovering of the economy, so that's at the same time for the people livelihood and also for like bigger economy on the industries and defining some key sectors. So that's, I mean, always of interest for the foreign medias and foreign markets, and that's something that people would look at. He has been putting in place an emergency economic task force quite quickly because obviously South Korea needs to work really quickly on this issue. Yesterday at a government meeting, President Lee called for measures to stabilize prices because he said that the increasing cost of living was causing too much pain for the South Korean citizens. That's something that we've been seeing covered in the foreign media. The other thing that's mostly what will the foreign media pay attention to in the future, I would say, is probably the fact that the government of Lee Jae-myung needs to restore the trust in democracy, something that we have been talking a lot about, obviously, because this election was a snap election made by the martial law. We've seen during the last 6 months, everything went like a big turmoil. And so there is a need to rebuild the public trust in South Korean democratic institutions. In his inauguration speech also, President Lee said that he wants to become a president who ends the politics of division. That would be another big issue. So that will take time to be done. Obviously, this is not the main priority that can be set up in less than a week. But I feel like this is kind of, they're already working on it, and there is no doubt that the foreign media will pay close attention to that. And this is the kind of subject that we will be checking on and looking at in the future.
Right. And before we delve deeper into the political polarization here, Chen Hao, also with regard to domestic affairs, quite a number of activists are saying that the Lee Jae-myung administration should do more to remove roadblocks to renewables and to ensure equality across genders. What's the latest on this front?
So we have 2 issues, renewable energy and gender issues, right? According to the latest poll in South Korea, 92.6% of the people here believe that renewable energy should be expanded. And notably, more than half of the population here showed a willingness to accept burdens such as electricity fee raises during the implementation of policies for carbon neutrality. And after taking office, President Lee has mentioned that the government will take the lead in preparing for supporting and investing in the upcoming future, highlighting the construction of the renewable energy highways and try to boost the local economies and competitiveness through renewable energies. We will need to wait and see whether the new government really has the sincerity to make greater investment in renewable energy systems and also infrastructures. Another issue is gender equality. We can indeed see that the gender divide, this phenomenon among younger generations in South Korea still persisted in this presidential election. Among the voters in their 20s, 37.2% of the males supported Lee Jun-seok a higher proportion than those supporting Kim Un-soo and Lee Jae-myung. However, only 10.3% of the females supported him. This phenomenon was also observed. We can also see that in the previous election in 2022, where the 20s age group, originally they are a very solid progressive voting bloc, split this time with most males supporting Yoon Suk-yeol and females supporting Lee Jae-myung. That was last time. And I still remember that the night when President Yoon declared martial law, I've rushed to the National Assembly directly, and also following the coming days, I was covering the stories. I can see that there are so many female or even feminism groups and even sexual minority groups, LGBT groups. They are all criticizing on President Yoon Suk-yeol's inaction on women's issues, also claiming that feminism has been turned into a slur used by men to insult women these several years. So now both women and men, they are dissatisfied with the current situation. However, in reality, women here still face a more like unfair treatment or unsafe conditions in various settings. For example, there you can see there are still like on the problem of unequal pay between men and women, and also like cases of discrimination and sexual harassment against female. This kind of problem remain prevalent. So the new government needs to carefully develop and gender policies to improve female rights, and meanwhile resolve the tensions between female and male.
Right, that is one of the national tasks here in the country. Chloe, beyond borders, apart from the presidential election here in South Korea, we also had elections over in Poland, in Canada, and also in Australia. Now, each election, regardless of its result, pundits are saying, we saw the so-called Trump effect. What can you tell us about this particular effect on the elections in recent years?
I would say that there is a Trump effect, like two different style of effects on the election. So if we take Europe, for example, the European far right seems to be quite galvanized with the Trump's victory. So already last time under the previous mandate, but I would say this time even more, it's even more visible. So there is a growing trend in the far right groups in Europe, in the populist parties in Europe as well, that has been seen as a parallel movement to the Make America Great Again movement. So the more the MAGA movement is going up, the more the populist party in Europe are also feeding on it and getting bigger and more seeable. For example, so in Poland, as you were saying, they did the presidential election on the 1st of June. The candidate who got elected was backed up by the Conservative Party Law and Justice there. And he was also backed up by Trump administration, which is a bit more of a novelty, let's say. The U.S. Homeland Security Secretary urged the people from Poland to vote for him before the election. So that could be seen as a bit of a weird turn of event from the U.S., who are usually not implicating themselves that much in European politics. We saw the same thing a bit further away now, and a few months ago, but the far-right movement, Alternative for Germany, got second in the federal election in February. And I don't know if you remember, but at the time, Elon Musk was still a big part at that time of the government of Donald Trump. He was very strongly backing them, making videos for their political meetings. And that was the first time that a far-right party got such a big number of votes since the end of World War II, because that's the thing in Europe, like the populist and far-right parties have been kind of pushed away after World War II, and they are slowly rising again. The Washington Post made an article, and in this article they were interviewing a German expert from a think tank who was saying that in Europe and in the Western world in general, elections are slowly turning into plebiscites. And the problem with plebiscites is that they are opening the door for populism. So that would explain this Trump effect of making far-right rise. And then we have the opposite effect on Canada and Australia, for example. That's the New York Times called the anti-Trump bump. So the idea is that in both countries, you had moderate, more progressive parties that were not doing so well, kind of you know, wavering there. And the other party would be more far-right or closer to Trump ideas. Because they were following Trump ideas for these elections, they got very strongly sanctioned. And in the end, the moderates and the progressive got into power or got more powers. For example, in Canada, the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, he definitely did his campaign on an anti-Trump motto. It was really also because Canada, being the closest neighbors to the US, was really surprised by the treatment that they got. Mexico and Canada were the first one to get really strong backlash from the Trump administration. So he won on that, and he also won because he was perceived as a more stable end to be able to manage transition and relationship with the Trump unpredictability, because, I mean, this is something that's playing on every level in geopolitical, in every country, I would say. So that would be the other effect, like the anti-Trump bump.
Right, indeed. Meanwhile, back here on the local front, Chenhao, as Chloe mentioned earlier, political polarization remains an issue here in the country. And despite the gap between the genders that you mentioned earlier, the division with regard to political inclinations is also quite severe. What have you been observing after the election?
I need to say that this 6 and 7 months, in fact, it is the most severe, most serious political and social conflict I've experienced in South Korea in my life, in my 13 years covering here. Once at a rally supporting President Yoon Suk-yeol, I saw someone ram a car at people who disagree with their views, and I also witnessed a passerby, a guy he just tried to expressing that he's very dissatisfied with President Yoon, and then he was being soon surrounded by Yoon's supporters, and then they accused him of being a communist. So, and then when I covered the story, when I interviewed with the politicians here, the Democratic Party lawmakers, they're blaming President Yoon for vetoing bills passed by the National Assembly, which is controlled by the Democratic Party. And then the People Power Party, the lawmakers, they're accusing Democratic Party, leading by Lee Jae-myung, continuously impeaching officials and cutting budgets, trying to paralyze the government. So now that the election is finally over and Lee Jae-myung has won, this outcome deserves everybody's respect. And I believe that even Lee Jae-myung himself strongly disagrees with those conservatives. He still needs to try to listen to their opinions, or even incorporating some of their suggestions or advices into decision making. It will be a very good way to resolve the divisions. We've also seen that, on his very first day in office, President Lee has met with other leaders from the opposition parties, which I think is a very positive sign. I hope to see President Lee meeting more frequently with those opposition party leaders and listen to their opinions. This will definitely help the conservative supporters feel sincerity and knowing that even if the president holds totally different views from themselves, he still values and cares about different opinions and voices.
Right. Hopefully they will find a path forward. Chloe, on a lighter note now, Korea's campaign practices, they're quite unique. Well, foreign observers have said they're quite unique. If you were to compare some of their campaign practices here in South Korea with those in Europe, what would you point out?
Yeah, so unlike Chenhao, I've been only doing 2 campaigns here. So I was there for the parliamentary elections, and then I was here for the snap presidential election. I would speak mostly, my first impression here was obviously with all the music, the songs going on, it's quite dynamic. You see the election trucks going on everywhere, also very big banners. So it's quite colorful, quite dynamic, and it's, as you say, very specific to South Korea. I would speak mostly about France because this is the place where I've followed most of my election days, obviously. But in France, the campaign period are maybe longer and there are way more candidates. So there is a thing where they need to get a lot of information to the people and to kind of show that they are different from the others. So the campaign is more on people-to-people basis. So that would be very on to the people who are giving tract for the parties, or they're also going house to house in some of, like, mostly in the villages, but they will go to each person and be like, do you know the candidate program? So they are trying really to get to the people and to talk to people. So also French people love to make debate. So we are quite big on the TV debate, as we can see also in South Korea. So it has never, I would not say it makes or break a winner, but we've seen that sometimes on some debates, some candidates were not doing that well, and it has kind of plumbeted their voting like appreciation. You could see in polls afterwards, people were kind of judging on the performance on that specific evening. Also, like, maybe lighter note as well, but political parties in France also have some colors, but I would say that they are not strongly identified with the party. So I've seen here, for example, idols who should not be wearing any specific colors. So blue, red is forbidden. Showing 2 fingers or 1 finger is also forbidden. This is definitely something that you would not see in France. You can't get critiques on this because the colors are not that strongly attached to the parties. And in the same way, that was fun to see also, like on Twitter or on Instagram, people were looking at all the photos of the idols here who have been voting and showing their hand with a very hint of color, and people are trying to find out if it's an hint of something. So that's also something quite different from France, where it's been like less so recently, but in France, stars and people from the show business are openly saying who they are voting for, and they will be putting their supports for one candidate on the campaign, and it doesn't seem like as big of a secret as it can be here.
You're right. Well, colors and numbers here in South Korea, especially during the election period, can have very big political statements. I think our stylists also here in Arirang were trying to stay away from the color of blue and red during that particular period. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Chloe, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you for having me.
And Chen Hao, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching, and do join us again same time tomorrow.